They have a saying for people like me: a woman scorned. It's a quaint phrase, something you'd find in a dusty, forgotten book. It's designed to make you think of hysterics, of shattered porcelain, and helpless, tear-streaked faces. It's a phrase created by men to diminish a woman's rage, to shrink a universe of righteous pain down to a manageable, dismissible cliché. They are, and have always been, wrong. I was not scorned. I was raised. I was leveled. The woman I was, the life I had so carefully constructed, the quiet, unassuming love I believed in, it was all turned to ash in the space of a single, silent, digital heartbeat. And what rises from an inferno of that magnitude is not a scorned woman. It is something else entirely. Something quieter, something far more patient, far more focused, and infinitely more dangerous. They also say that revenge is a dish best served cold. Another pretty hollow phrase from a world that doesn't understand. Cold implies a lack of passion, a finality, a single act of serving. What I orchestrated was not a dish. It was a cathedral. It took 10 years, 3,652 days to build. Every single morning, I woke up and laid another stone of resolve. Every afternoon, I mixed another batch of mortar with my silent tears. Every night, I cut another piece of stained glass, each shard a memory of a new lie discovered. It became my secret religion, my life's work. And when my cathedral of vengeance was finally complete, I did not serve it to him. I invited him inside for the dedication ceremony, handed him a glass of champagne, and then, from the shadows, I pulled the keystone. I let the entire magnificent, beautiful, terrible structure collapse upon his head. My name is Sarah Jensen. Or, it was. That woman is a ghost, a foundation I was forced to build upon. I am the architect of this work. And this is the story of how I deconstructed my husband, not just his life, but the very idea of him, until nothing was left but the cold, unvarnished, and inescapable truth. 10 years ago, my world was a masterpiece of collaborative illusion. It was a flawless production where I was both the lead actress and the uncredited, unpaid stage manager. The show, of course, was The Glorious Life of Mark Jensen. Mark was Austin's financial golden boy, a man who moved through the world with the frictionless, entitled grace of someone who had never been seriously told no. He possessed the matinee idol charm of a Kennedy and the cold, reptilian ambition of a Wall Street titan. Our life was his personal gallery, each new acquisition, the house, the German cars, the A-list friends who were more like business assets, a testament to his prowess. Before Mark, my world was one of messy, joyful, chaotic creation. I was a painter. My identity, my very soul, was forged in the acrid, beloved smell of turpentine and linseed oil, in the tactile, intimate feel of a loaded brush against a primed, yielding canvas. I had a small but significant gallery show lined up in Soho right after we got engaged. It was my first major break, my dream. But Mark had a can't-miss networking weekend at a hedge fund manager's estate in the Hamptons that same weekend. "Babe, you can have a gallery show anytime," he'd said, kissing my forehead in that specific way of his that was both affectionate and deeply, fundamentally patronizing. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for us, for our future. This is the big leagues." I canceled the show. For our future. It was the first of 1,000 tiny surrenders. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my art became a hobby, then a memory, then an anecdote he would tell at dinner parties. My wife, Sarah, she's the creative one, used to be quite the painter. My studio, once my sanctuary of controlled chaos, became a pristine, well-organized storage space for seasonal decorations and his old golf clubs. I convinced myself this was a worthy sacrifice, that our shared life was a canvas grander than any I could stretch myself. I poured my creative soul into being the perfect corporate wife, a role I performed with Oscar-worthy skill. I remembered the names of his clients' children, their allergies, their favorite sports teams. I laughed at their terrible sexist jokes. I curated our home into a space that screamed effortless, inherited success. I was his partner. I was his foundation. I was the fool who never thought to inspect the bedrock for fault lines. Our 15th anniversary was to be the magnum opus of our curated life. Mark, a connoisseur of grand cinematic gestures that were more about him than about us, had orchestrated a weekend of flawless, Instagrammable romance. It culminated on a quiet Sunday evening. He presented me with a long, slender box from a jeweler so exclusive it didn't have a sign on its discreet downtown door. Inside lay a diamond tennis bracelet, a perfect, cold river of fire that felt less like a gift and more like a beautifully crafted set of handcuffs. "For my beautiful wife," he'd murmured, his voice a low, practiced purr. "A little something to match the sparkle in your eyes." My gift to him was, as always, more sentimental, requiring more effort. I had spent the better part of a year hunting down a rare, signed first edition of The Great Gatsby, his favorite novel. It had cost a small fortune, sourced from a private collector in London. He feigned astonishment, kissed me with practiced warmth, and placed it on a high shelf in his impressive home office, a trophy to be displayed, not read. Another acquisition for the gallery. Then came his final, triumphant gift, the one he was most proud of. It was housed in a heavy, matte black box that felt cool and important in my hands. "It's a smart frame, babe," he announced, his voice fizzing with the infectious excitement of a boy with a new gadget. "The best on the market, military-grade screen, 4K resolution. It syncs directly with our family cloud album, constantly updated. It'll cycle through all our best memories, right here in the living room, all day long. Our whole story, on repeat." He placed it on the marble mantelpiece, dead center, like an idol at a shrine. He plugged it in, and it flickered to life. The resolution was breathtakingly clear, more real than reality. It was like looking through a window into a perfected version of our past. There we were, impossibly young and windswept, laughing on a sailboat on Lake Travis. There we were, clinking champagne glasses in Paris, the Eiffel Tower a glittering cliché behind us. There we were, bringing our golden retriever puppy, Gatsby, home for the first time. A perfect, seamless, curated loop of a life anyone would kill for. My heart, despite the hollow feeling the bracelet had given me, felt full. This was us. We had built this. I saw the bracelet on my wrist, the rare book on his shelf, the high-tech frame on the mantel, and I felt a wave of foolish, intoxicating, manufactured love. I went to the kitchen to open the vintage Krug he'd been saving for a special occasion, my mind cataloging 15 years of these carefully selected happy moments. I remember the precise, satisfying pop of the cork, a sound of engineered celebration. I remember the whisper of the bubbles as I poured the pale gold liquid into 2 baccarat crystal flutes, a wedding gift. I walked back into the living room, a genuine, unguarded, foolish smile on my face. And that is when the world, as I knew it, ended. A new picture had cycled onto the frame. It wasn't a memory I shared. It was a hotel room, coldly luxurious, impersonally expensive. A corner suite at the W Hotel downtown, I would later realize. A place he'd told me was too loud and trendy. Mark was in the photo, but it was a version of him I had never been allowed to see. He was stripped of his armor, his bespoke Italian suit, his Swiss watch, his heavy gold wedding ring. He was bare, his expression one of pure, unguarded, selfish hedonism. And he was not alone. A woman was with him. Young, blonde, with the sharp, hungry look of someone who saw the world as a ladder to be climbed. Her name, I would discover in the wee, desolate hours of that same night, while my husband snored beside me, was Chloe. His new star analyst, fresh from Wharton, a woman he'd described to me as brilliant but humorless. She was wrapped around him like a python, her lithe, toned body a stark contrast to my own. They were locked in a kiss that wasn't tender. It was a transaction. It was a conquest. Her hand, slender and manicured with pale pink polish, was splayed possessively across his bare chest, right over his heart. Silence. Not a quiet, peaceful silence, but a loud one. A roaring, deafening void where the sound of my own heartbeat used to be. The crystal flute, still in my hand, felt impossibly heavy, a leaden weight. It slipped through my numb fingers. It did not shatter. The thick, hand-knotted Persian rug, an anniversary gift from his parents from a decade ago, cushioned its fall. The glass landed with a soft, dull, sickening thud. Champagne soaked into the deep blue wool, a spreading stain of gold. Mark's voice, cheerful and oblivious, drifted from his study, where he was closing a deal on the phone. "It's a win-win, Jerry. Trust me." He hadn't seen it. The frame, a mindless, soulless machine, obedient to its programming, cycled to the next memory. A picture of me, smiling at my 30th birthday party, surrounded by friends who were more his than mine. The hotel room was gone, a digital ghost that had passed through the wall of my life, leaving irreparable damage in its wake. But my mind is not a machine. My mind took a perfect, high-resolution snapshot. That image was etched onto the inside of my eyelids with a hot, sharp needle. Every damning detail was preserved in amber. The specific brand of Fiji water on the nightstand. The way the recessed hotel lighting caught the blonde highlights in her hair. The look of smug, satiated bliss on my husband's face. Have you ever experienced a moment of such profound trauma that time itself seems to warp and fracture? The world didn't just stop. It shattered into a million sharp, glittering, painful pieces. My body was frozen in place, a statue of a happy wife, but my mind was in a state of violent, chaotic hyperdrive, frantically trying to reassemble a reality that made sense. Every memory of the last 15 years was now called into question, held up to this new, harsh light, and found wanting. Every late night at the office, every unavoidable business trip, every tender moment of affection, was any of it real, or was it all part of the performance? I felt a wave of vertigo so intense, I had to grip the back of a plush armchair to keep from collapsing. He walked back into the room, a triumphant, self-satisfied smile on his face. Deal closed. Then he saw me. He saw my face, as white and blank as an unprimed canvas. He saw the overturned flute, the dark, spreading stain on the expensive rug. "Everything okay, babe?" he asked, the smile faltering, replaced by a flicker of masculine irritation at the sight of a problem to be solved. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I lifted my head from the stain on the floor and looked at him. Really looked at him. It was as if a veil had been torn from my eyes, a veil I hadn't even known was there. The handsome face I had mapped with my own hands, the face I had loved with every foolish fiber of my being, suddenly seemed alien and grotesque. The familiar, charming lines around his eyes no longer looked like laugh lines. They looked like cracks in a cheap plaster facade. He was a stranger. A well-dressed, articulate, and utterly convincing stranger who had been feasting on my life, my love, my future, for 15 years. And in that moment, as the cloying, sweet smell of spilled vintage champagne began to fill the perfect room, something inside me broke. But it didn't break apart into helpless pieces. It broke open. A part of me that was soft and accommodating and endlessly forgiving died a swift and silent death. And in its place, something new began to grow, something cold and hard and patient as granite. The part of me that wanted to scream, to claw at his handsome face, to shatter every beautiful, meaningless object in that perfect room, was overruled by a calmer, more lethal instinct. That would be his scene. This was going to be mine. My victory would not be a fleeting, satisfying emotional outburst. It would be a cold, calculated, and exquisitely detailed work of art. I forced my lips to move, to form a smile. It felt like trying to bend cold steel with my bare hands. Just overwhelmed, I whispered, my voice a stranger in my own throat, raspy and unfamiliar. 15 years. It's a long time to love someone. The double meaning was a secret, bitter, and exhilarating pleasure. He bought it. Of course he did. He closed the distance between us and pulled me into a hug. My body went rigid, a column of ice. I had to consciously, deliberately force my muscles to relax, to not recoil from his touch, as if from a hot flame. The scent of his expensive cologne, a custom blend from a perfumer in London, a scent I used to associate with safety and desire, now smelled like formaldehyde and decay. His embrace felt like a cage. "To 15 more, my love," he said, his voice warm and close to my ear. "The best is yet to come." I pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. My own must have looked like dark, empty pools, bottomless and cold. "To 15 more," I echoed. But in the silent, screaming, newly reordered chambers of my mind, a new vow was being sworn, a vow written in blood and champagne. I would not give him 15 more years. I would dedicate the next decade of my life to the systematic, meticulous, and utter annihilation of his. This would not be a crime of passion. It would be a premeditated masterpiece of revenge. That night was the longest and most transformative of my life. I moved through the familiar motions of our evening routine in a state of surreal, out-of-body detachment. I pretended to watch a movie with him, my eyes fixed on the flickering screen, but seeing only the ghostly, repeating loop of the hotel room photograph. I stood next to him at the polished marble vanity in our bathroom, brushing my teeth, my reflection a hollow-eyed stranger next to the grotesque, smiling parody of the man I thought I knew. When we finally got into our vast, empty bed, he rolled over and tried to initiate intimacy, a casual, entitled gesture. I feigned a migraine, a classic, pathetic excuse that he accepted with an audible sigh of irritation, before rolling over and falling asleep in under 5 minutes. The lie came so easily, so naturally. I was a quick study. Lying there in the oppressive darkness, inches from his sleeping body, was a unique and profound form of torture. His familiar scent on the 1,000-thread-count Egyptian cotton pillows, the steady, rhythmic sound of his breathing, the animal warmth radiating from his body. It was all a lie, a monstrous, elaborate lie. I felt a suffocating loneliness, the kind that only comes from the absolute certainty of being utterly, completely alone in a life you thought you shared. The grief was a physical weight, a stone pressing down on my chest, making each breath a conscious, painful effort. Tears, hot and silent, welled in my eyes, and this time I let them fall. I let them trace hot paths down my temples and into my hair. I cried for the woman I had been only hours before, the happy, trusting, naive fool who had walked into that living room with a heart full of love. She was dead, and I, the stranger who now inhabited her body, was mourning her passing. But as the hours ticked by, as the moon traced its slow, indifferent path across the sky, the grief began to recede. It was systematically burned away by the rising heat of a new, powerful emotion. Rage. A pure, cold, clarifying rage. It wasn't the hot, messy anger of a screaming match. It was the focused, diamond-hard fury of a master strategist. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm of pain and confusion, began to clear. The self-pity, the why me, the wasn't I enough, all evaporated. Those were the questions of a victim. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and I was about to become a predator. The question was no longer why. It became how. By the time the first pale, apologetic fingers of dawn crept through the expensive blinds, A plan had begun to form. It was a vague, shadowy thing at first, an amorphous blueprint in the darkness of my mind. But it had a spine of unbendable steel. I would not leave him. Not yet. Leaving was too simple, too clean. That was an escape, not a victory. It would grant him an easy exit, a simple divorce, a new life with his blonde analyst. No, I would stay. I would become the perfect, smiling ghost in his perfect, hollow life. I would be a beautiful, venomous serpent in his personal Garden of Eden. And he would be blissfully, arrogantly unaware until the precise moment I decided to strike. My revenge would not be a single explosive event. It would be the very environment he lived and breathed. I would become the architect of his personal slow-motion apocalypse. The first year was a marathon of brutal self-discipline, a feat of emotional endurance that would have impressed a Stoic philosopher. I have since come to call it the year of the actress. I threw myself into the role of the adoring, slightly vapid wife with a terrifying method-acting zeal. I woke up at dawn to attend yoga classes, not for peace of mind, but to hone my body and discipline into a weapon. I returned to have his favorite breakfast, a perfect, fluffy omelet with chives, ready for him. I listened with rapt, doe-eyed attention as he recounted his workday triumphs and tribulations. I learned to initiate affection, forcing myself to touch his arm at a dinner party, to kiss his cheek as he left for work, to play the part he so clearly expected and required. Every single interaction was a performance. Every smile was a lie. Every touch was a strategic maneuver designed to lull him into a state of absolute security. The hardest parts were the social obligations, the endless carousel of dinner parties, charity galas, and weekend trips to other people's lake houses. I became a master of the meaningless pleasantry, a connoisseur of the empty compliment. I was living in a state of constant, high-alert vigilance, my mind a supercomputer, processing and analyzing his every word, every gesture, every fleeting glance. I learned to read the subtle tells of his lies, a slight tightening around his eyes, a tendency to touch his face. I was not just his wife. I was his biographer, his analyst, his hunter. It was at a fundraiser for the Austin Symphony, held at the impossibly lush Laguna Gloria, about 6 months into my new life, that I had my first true public test. Chloe was there, not as Mark's guest this time, but on the arm of a junior partner Mark was actively mentoring. Mark, of course, had orchestrated the entire thing. It was a way for them to be in the same room, a delicious, risky thrill for their sordid little game. He brought her over to me by the terrace, a proud, proprietary look on his face. "Sarah, you remember Chloe. She's been an absolute rock star on the new acquisition, a real killer." Chloe smiled at me, a dazzling, confident, predatory smile. "It's so great to see you again, Sarah. I just love your dress. Is it vintage?" Her perfume, a cloying, expensive floral I now recognized from the faint scent on his shirts, drifted towards me. I felt a visceral, primal urge to take my champagne flute and smash it into her perfect, smiling face. Instead, I smiled back, my own smile a carefully constructed shield of polite society. "Thank you, Chloe. It's a pleasure. Mark is so lucky to have such a dedicated and, clearly, very talented team." The two of us stood there, the wife and the mistress, exchanging empty compliments under the twinkling party lights, while the man who connected us stood between us, beaming, utterly oblivious to the silent, savage war being waged in the air between us. It was a moment of such profound, grotesque absurdity that I almost laughed out loud. Later that night, I went into the silent, dark space of my studio, locked the door, and methodically punched a heavy canvas bag filled with old rags until my knuckles were raw and bleeding, the silent, rhythmic, physical release the only thing keeping me from shattering into a million pieces. This rage, this magnificent, powerful energy, needed a conduit. It needed a purpose beyond silent screams in the car and bruised knuckles. My dusty studio became my war room. I purchased a new, high-powered laptop, a burner, paid for with cash from a dozen different ATM withdrawals over a month. I set up a secure, anonymous internet connection through a series of layered VPNs, routing my signal through servers in Sweden, Switzerland, and Malaysia. And I began my true, secret, and vital education. My first purchases were a library of books, delivered to a private, anonymous P.O. box under a false name. Forensic Accounting for Dummies, Investment Banking Fundamentals, Cybersecurity and Corporate Espionage, The Art of the Short Sell, Game Theory and Strategy. I devoured them. I took free online courses from the best universities in the world, MIT, Stanford, Wharton, my nights filled with the cold, blue glow of the laptop screen and the dense, beautiful language of high finance and corporate law. I learned about derivatives, hedge funds, shell corporations, and the brutal, elegant poetry of a well-executed, hostile takeover. The woman who once struggled to balance a checkbook was now learning to trace the flow of dark money through the shadowy arteries of the global financial system. I taught myself to code in Python, not just to analyze data, but to build my own tools. Knowledge, however, is useless without data. I needed access to his digital kingdom. My patient observation and his predictable arrogance paid off. I had his password mnemonics. It took me a week of quiet, painstaking, late-night trial and error, but I finally cracked his master password. The moment I logged into his primary email account, I felt a dizzying, terrifying surge of power and revulsion. The sheer, staggering volume of his deceit was breathtaking. It wasn't just Chloe. It was a rotating cast of characters over the years. A real estate agent in Dallas, a marketing exec in San Francisco, receipts for gifts I'd never seen, jewelry from Tiffany's, lingerie from La Perla, for hotel rooms in cities he was supposedly visiting alone for vital meetings, for intimate dinners for two at restaurants he claimed he hated. And the emails were my Rosetta Stone of pain, the detailed minutes of my own execution, the way he and Chloe talked about me. They had nicknames for me. The curator, the first lady, the domestic CEO. They mocked my interests, my friends, my life's work before him. He wrote to her once, after I'd hosted a successful charity luncheon that raised over $100,000 for a children's hospital. The curator was in her element today. She's so good at all that meaningless, pretty stuff. It keeps her busy and feeling important, which is perfect for us. Each word was a razor blade, but I did not bleed. I collected them. I archived everything. I created a fortress of irrefutable evidence on multiple encrypted hard drives, which I then stored in different, climate-controlled safe deposit boxes across the state. This was not just an insurance policy. It was a deep, psychological profile. I was not just learning what he did. I was learning how he thought. His bottomless arrogance, his deep-seated condescension, his utter, unshakable certainty that I was a simple, beautiful, controllable creature. That would be the fulcrum upon which I would lever his entire world off its axis. I was now ready for Phase 2, the year of the seed. I had to build a weapon, and he was going to provide all the raw materials. I had to plant an idea in his mind so deftly, so cunningly, that he would believe it was his own brilliant, singular discovery. My plan formed around his greatest, most predictable weakness, his intellectual ego. He had to be the smartest man in every room. The thought that he could miss a lucrative opportunity, especially one that his artistic, financially illiterate wife had stumbled upon, was anathema to him. I invented Chroma Vest. I spent 6 months on the creation myth. It was my first true artistic project in years. I built a flawless, professional, and deeply convincing website, complete with a slick, minimalist logo I designed myself. I wrote dozens of pages of dense, impenetrable, but impressive-sounding corporate jargon about its mission. Leveraging quantum AI and neural network analysis to quantify emotional resonance in emerging visual arts, creating a new paradigm of predictive, high-yield asset allocation. It was utter, glorious nonsense, but it was the kind of nonsense that tech investors loved. I created a ghost CEO, Dr. Klaus Richter, a reclusive, eccentric genius from the Max Planck Institute in Berlin. I fabricated his entire academic history, wrote academic papers and blog posts under his name, and even created a few fake online interviews with obscure European financial journals. I built an entire digital ecosystem of lies, a Potemkin village of high finance. Then, I waited for the perfect moment to plant the seed. It came during a painfully boring Sunday brunch with one of his most insufferable tech investor friends. "You know," I said, with a perfect imitation of ditzy, wide-eyed curiosity, "I read the most fascinating thing in an obscure European art journal." I paused, letting their condescending, patient smiles form. It was about this incredible tech incubator in Berlin, a company called ChromaVest. I proceeded to give them my carefully rehearsed, clueless summary of my own fake company. Mark's reaction was exactly as I had scripted it in my mind. He laughed. A loud, booming, dismissive laugh. "Sarah, babe, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. Quantifying art? That's a scam for rich European idiots who don't know what to do with their money. Stick to your volunteering." His friend chuckled along, a loyal hyena. I looked down, feigning embarrassment, a slight blush rising on my cheeks, a trick I had perfected in the mirror. "Oh, you're probably right. It just sounded so innovative." The seed was planted. Over the next month, I watched it germinate in the fertile soil of his ego. I saw ChromaVest in his late-night search history. I saw him on private, high-level financial forums, asking if anyone had heard of the reclusive Klaus Richter. Then, one evening, he came to me, his eyes gleaming with the manic thrill of discovery. "Sarah, you are not going to believe this. Remember that crazy art company you mentioned? ChromaVest? Well, I did some serious deep dive research, pulled some strings with my contacts in Germany. It's not a scam. It's the real deal. Incredibly exclusive. By invitation only. But I got us in. I'm telling you, honey, this is the future." He was so proud, so utterly convinced of his own genius for seeing the opportunity he thought I had missed. I had to physically restrain myself from smiling a predator's smile. I just looked at him with wide, adoring, innocent eyes, a perfect mirror reflecting his own perceived brilliance back at him. "Oh, Mark, that's incredible! My smart husband!" The trap was set. Now, for the next 7 years, I would patiently, meticulously, and lovingly build the cage. My life became a work of breathtaking, exhausting hypocrisy. By day, I was the perfect, serene trophy wife. I chaired the committees. I hosted the fundraisers. I was a pillar of the Westlake Hills community. I was a beautiful, smiling ghost in my own life, playing a part with such unwavering conviction that even I sometimes forgot who I was underneath the placid surface. By night, I was Klaus Richter. I was the architect of ruin. ChromaVest became Mark's golden goose, his secret, brilliant project. He poured his own undeclared bonus money into it, the money he had hidden from our shared life. I, as Klaus, would send him detailed, jargon-filled performance reports that I created myself, complete with elegant charts and graphs. The returns were, of course, spectacular. I designed the algorithm to be brilliant, but believably volatile, with small, nerve-wracking dips followed by exhilarating, logic-defying surges. It made the whole thing feel real, dangerous, and utterly irresistible. His greed and his ego did the rest of the work for me. He began to bring in his most trusted, high-net-worth clients. It was always done with a conspiratorial whisper on the golf course or over a glass of ridiculously expensive Japanese whiskey. "This is a private opportunity," he'd murmur, his voice low and serious. "Completely off the grid, a chance to get in on the ground floor of a genuine revolution. But it stays between us. This is for my inner circle only." They saw his personal returns. They trusted his golden touch. They jumped in, wiring millions upon millions of dollars into the waiting, welcoming, and entirely fictitious arms of my digital ghost. The money, of course, was not being invested in AI art prediction. It was being laundered through a process of my own design. I had become an expert in the art of financial misdirection. The funds were routed through a dizzying, complex labyrinth of shell corporations I'd registered in jurisdictions with impenetrable privacy shields: Panama, the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Singapore. From there, the capital was converted into the most boring, stable, and untraceable assets imaginable: blue-chip dividend stocks, municipal bonds, physical gold bullion stored in a high-security vault in Zurich, and prime, income-generating real estate in the most stable markets in the world, like London and Tokyo. All of it was held by a meticulously structured charitable trust I had established in Delaware, the St. Jude Foundation, named, with a secret, bitter smile, for the patron saint of lost causes. The trust's charter was a work of legal genius, drafted with the help of an unwitting, high-priced, and very reputable law firm I'd consulted entirely online through anonymous channels. Upon its dissolution, its assets were to be transferred in their entirety to a private holding company registered in a name Mark would never, in a million years, think to look for: my mother's maiden name. I wasn't just stealing his ill-gotten gains. I was transforming them, purifying them, into a clean, legitimate, and untouchable fortress of my own. During these long, patient, and lonely years, I returned to my art. The inferno of my initial rage had cooled, not into embers, but into the controlled, white-hot, and incredibly productive fire of a blast furnace. It was the perfect temperature for creation. My studio was no longer a sanctuary. It was my command center. It was the only place in the universe where I could be myself. I began a new collection of paintings, my secret testament to the truth. Each canvas was a document, a piece of evidence, a confession, translated into the only language I had left that was truly and completely my own. I painted his Porsche, a gleaming black Predator, parked on a rain-slicked street outside the anonymous glass and steel apartment tower where he met his lovers. I called it Valet. The reflection in the puddles on the asphalt showed a distorted, fractured version of the glittering city skyline, a metaphor for his broken, hidden life. I painted a hyper-realistic still life of a hotel room nightstand. On it was his unique Patek Philippe watch, a gift from me for his 40th birthday, lying next to a half-empty glass of water, leaving a condensation ring on the polished wood. Beside the glass, almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look for it, was a single long strand of blonde hair. I called it Borrowed Time. I painted a symbolic, surrealist piece, a beautiful, ornate, gilded birdcage, the kind one sees in museums. The door of the cage was wide open. Inside, a small, gray, unassuming bird was not flying out to freedom. Instead, it sat on its perch, methodically, patiently, sharpening its beak and its talons on a cuttlefish bone. I called it patience. These paintings were my co-conspirators. They held my secrets. They kept me sane. I poured every ounce of my disciplined, calculated fury onto those canvases. And in doing so, I rediscovered the artist he had tried to erase. She was back, and her vision was clear, cold, and terrifying. 10 years, 3,652 days of smiling at my captor, of meticulously plotting his demise while he slept peacefully and obliviously beside me. People ask how I did it. The answer is purpose. My revenge was not an impulse. It was my vocation. It was my North Star in the long, dark night of my life. What do you think is a more powerful force in the universe? A man's casual, careless cruelty, or a woman's focused, decade-long righteous and creative wrath. The final act of my 10-year play required a stage, and Mark, in his infinite, glorious hubris, built it for me himself. The 10th Annual Austin Children's Foundation Gala. It was the absolute pinnacle of the Austin social calendar. And this year, Mark was not just the chairman. He was the night's sole honoree. He was to be given a prestigious award for his decade of philanthropy and community leadership. The governor was scheduled to present it. Every major news outlet in Texas would be there. It was to be the public coronation of King Mark. It was the perfect setting for a public execution. I approached him 2 weeks before the gala. My heart was a block of solid ice in my chest. I had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in the mirror. My voice was a careful symphony of hope, nerves, and artistic humility. "Mark, darling," I said, finding him in his magnificent home office, reviewing his speech. "I have something to ask you. It feels a little audacious, and please say no if it's too much. I've been painting again. Seriously. And a friend of mine, Eleanor, the one on the board at the Blanton Museum, she saw some of my new work." This was true. I had spent years cultivating that friendship, a long, patient game of social chess. She was very impressed. She suggested, as a grand gesture for the foundation, that I could debut the collection at the gala. A surprise unveiling, perhaps. His face lit up with 1,000 watts of pure, unadulterated narcissistic delight. It was perfect. His big night, made even more poignant and memorable by the dramatic artistic renaissance of his devoted, talented wife. It added a layer of culture, sensitivity, and profound partnership to his brand. He would be the perfect husband, magnanimously supporting his wife's little hobby on his big night. "Sarah, that's not audacious, it's genius," he boomed, pulling me into a hug that felt like being wrapped in a cold, heavy snake. "My brilliant wife, back in the spotlight where you belong. We'll make it the centerpiece of the evening, a grand tribute to your talent." He had just gleefully, eagerly handed me the loaded gun, the spotlight, and the entire, unsuspecting audience. The fool. The night of the gala was a masterpiece of surreal, high-stakes theater. The grand ballroom at the Four Seasons was a glittering, self-congratulatory ecosystem of wealth and power. The air was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5, expensive leather, and quiet desperation. Mark was in his element, a radiant, benevolent sun around which all the lesser planets of Austin society orbited. His hand was firmly, possessively on the small of my back, a gesture of ownership he performed for the cameras as he guided me through the throng. I was his queen, smiling, nodding, a vision of serene, supportive elegance in a custom-made gown by a designer he favored, the silk, the color of dried blood. My 12 paintings stood on the stage, silent, imposing, and shrouded in heavy black silk, like a row of coffins waiting for their occupants. My heart was not pounding. It was slow, steady, and heavy, a metronome counting down the final beats of his old life and the first of my new one. I was not nervous. I was an actress on opening night who knew her lines, her blocking, and the devastating impact of the final act by heart. I was a general on the morning of a battle she knew, with absolute certainty, that she had already won. After the mediocre filet mignon and the endless self-serving speeches from city council members, Mark took the stage to thunderous, sustained applause. He was a master of the form, speaking with practiced, heartfelt sincerity about charity, community, and the sacred duty of the fortunate to give back. He thanked his clients for their unwavering trust, his partners for their steadfast loyalty. The hypocrisy was so profound, so audacious, it was almost sublime. Then he turned his 1,000-watt, professionally whitened smile on me. And now, for a very special moment. It is my profound, personal honor to celebrate not just a great philanthropist, but a great artist. For 15 years, She has been my rock, my inspiration, and the love of my life. After a decade of quiet, selfless dedication to our family, my brilliant wife, Sarah Jensen, is sharing her incredible, deeply personal new work with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage to unveil her collection, titled, simply, A Private Life. I walked onto the stage. The applause felt like the roar of a distant, irrelevant ocean. I stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of expectant, smiling faces, 200 of the most powerful people in Texas. I saw his clients, their faces beaming with smug trust. I saw his partners, puffed up with shared success. And I saw her, Chloe, seated at a back table, looking exquisitely, beautifully bored. My eyes met Mark's. He was standing beside my shrouded artworks, glowing with a pride that had nothing to do with me and everything, absolutely everything, to do with himself. My voice, when I spoke into the microphone, was a quiet surprise, even to me. It did not tremble. It was as clear and cold as a winter morning, and it carried to every corner of the silent room. Thank you, Mark. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you all for being here tonight. This collection is personal. It's about the stories we tell ourselves in order to survive. It's about the beautiful, polished surfaces we construct for the world, and the complicated, messy, and sometimes terrible truths that live and breathe in the darkness just beneath. It's about the lives we lead behind the closed doors of our very beautiful homes. I moved to the first painting on the far left. With a slow, deliberate, and theatrical motion, I pulled away the black silk cloth. "Anniversary," I announced into the silent, expectant room. A wave of polite, appreciative applause rippled through the crowd. They saw a beautiful, tragic, still life. A masterpiece of light and shadow, of luxury and loss. Only I, and the man on the stage beside me, could see the truth. I moved down the line. I unveiled the next painting. "Valet," I said, my voice even. Then, "borrowed time." Then, the symbolic ones. "Patience." With each reveal, the atmosphere in the room began to subtly, but perceptibly, shift. The polite applause grew fainter, more hesitant. A current of uneasy, confused silence began to ripple through the audience. The paintings were magnificent. There was no denying their technical skill, but their collective mood was chilling, unsettling. A narrative was unfolding, picture by picture, and it was a cold, brutal one. I could see Mark's confident smile becoming fixed, a rictus of confusion. His eyes darted from the increasingly dark paintings to me, a question, a flicker of panic, beginning to form. I saved the most damning for last. The final, largest canvas at the absolute center of the stage. When I pulled the heavy silk from it, a collective, sharp, audible intake of breath, a single, unified gasp, echoed through the vast ballroom. It was the hotel room. I had rendered it with the cold, merciless, and forensic precision of a crime scene photographer. The man, the woman, the kiss. I had painted them from an angle that obscured their faces in deep, expressionistic shadow, a clever trick of plausible deniability. But the man's watch, the unique, limited edition Patek Philippe Thine had given him for his 40th birthday, was rendered in exquisite, unmistakable, damning detail. And the woman's blonde hair, the exact shade of Chloe's, was a halo of cold, unforgiving light. I saw Chloe's face, even from across the room. It collapsed as if struck. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled from her very soul. And Mark looked at the painting, and then at me, and his face, his handsome, confident, arrogant face, became a mask of pure, abject, comprehending horror. The truth, after 10 long years of comfortable lies, had finally arrived. I stepped back to the microphone. The silence in the room was now absolute, a heavy, suffocating, and glorious blanket. "And this final piece," I began. 9:45 p.m., the exact second. on a secure server in a climate-controlled facility in Iceland. My silent, patient, beautiful algorithm, my digital angel of vengeance, executed its final, elegant command. It initiated a catastrophic, simultaneous sell-off of every phantom share of Chroma Vest, flooding the market and crashing its value to absolute zero in less than the time it takes to draw a single, shocked breath. A phone on the front table lit up, buzzing violently against a water glass. The sound, an obscenity in the silence. It belonged to Mark's biggest, most important client. Then another phone buzzed, and another. A digital epidemic of financial ruin erupted in a wave across the room as the wealthiest people in Texas were slammed with automated margin calls and fraud alerts from their brokerage firms. Their secret, can't-miss, high-yield investment had not just failed. It had evaporated into thin, digital air. Mark's own phone began to vibrate in his pocket with the frantic, percussive intensity of a jackhammer. He fumbled for it, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He stared at the screen, his mouth falling open, a silent, guttural scream forming in his throat. The whispers in the room became a roar of panic and accusation. All eyes, of his betrayed clients, his horrified partners, the salivating media, were on him. I leaned into the microphone. My voice, no longer quiet, cut through the rising chaos like a shard of diamond. "This final piece," I said, my voice ringing with the clarion authority of a judge delivering a long-awaited verdict, "is called Return on Investment." I looked directly into my husband's soul, or what was left of it, and I saw nothing but terror. "For 10 years, I announced to the captive, horrified room, my husband, Mark Jensen, has been a secret pioneer in the world of high finance. He developed a revolutionary, high-risk strategy of taking intangible assets, my love, my trust, my youth, the entirety of my life, and leveraging them for his own personal and very private gain. His primary partner in this exciting venture was his talented and very dedicated analyst, Ms. Chloe Adams." I nodded curtly in her direction, a gesture of final, utter dismissal. "You can see a rendering of their initial public offering right here." I gestured to the painting. A wave of horrified understanding and revulsion swept the crowd. "But as any savvy investor knows," I continued, my voice as cold and unforgiving as a glacier calving into a frozen sea, "speculative bubbles always, eventually burst. And tonight, ladies and gentlemen, the market has finally corrected itself. All of that speculative capital, all of that imaginary value you thought you possessed, Mark, all the millions your most trusted clients poured into your secret fund, it is not gone. It has simply been reallocated." I paused, letting the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly aimed, poison-tipped dart. The tens of millions of dollars invested in Chroma Vest are, in fact, perfectly safe. Over the past 7 years, they have been strategically and painstakingly moved into a highly conservative, globally diversified, and exceptionally stable portfolio. A portfolio held by a charitable trust. A trust which, upon its legal dissolution at precisely 9:45 p.m. this evening, has transferred its complete and considerable assets to a private holding company. I smiled a slow, sweet, terrible smile. My holding company. Consider it a severance package. My severance. For 15 years of devoted, unpaid, and exceptionally hostile service. I placed the microphone gently back in its stand. The feedback shrieked for a second, a fitting, final scream. I did not give him the satisfaction of another look. I turned my back on him, on the paintings, on the entire wretched life I had just publicly and gloriously detonated. My back was straight, my head held high. I walked off the stage, my heels clicking a steady, resolute, triumphant rhythm on the polished wood. The crowd, a stunned, silent mass, parted before me as if I were Moses and they were the Red Sea. I walked through the grand ballroom doors, held open by a stunned, speechless doorman, and out into the cool, quiet, and blessedly clean night air. I did not run. I did not look back. I left my husband alone on that stage, trapped in the merciless, flashing crossfire of 100 cameras, surrounded by the smoldering, irreparable wreckage of his life. He had nothing left but the expensive, tailored suit on his back and the silent, useless microphone in his trembling hand. The aftermath was, as the media gleefully and repeatedly reported, biblical. There were lawsuits, a federal investigation, a spectacular front-page public immolation of a man who was once a king. Mark's life became a case study in hubris and disgrace. Chloe vanished, a ghost in the society pages, her career over before it had ever truly begun. I was insulated from it all. My lawyers, a formidable all-female team from a top firm in New York, whom I had retained months in advance, called my plan a masterwork of legally ambiguous but morally righteous retribution. They said I hadn't broken the law. I had simply created and exploited a new one. I cooperated fully with the SEC. My records, unlike Mark's, were impeccable. I arranged for the return of every single dollar belonging to Mark's other clients from my trust. My target was never them. They were just the unfortunate collateral damage in a war they didn't even know he was waging. The money that was left, Mark's vast personal fortune, the money he had hidden from me and our life together, was now mine. Clean, clear, and legal. But it was never truly about the money. The money was the ammunition, not the victory. It was the medium, not the message. The victory was this quiet room, this incredible light, this profound, unshakable, and absolute freedom. The man I married took a vibrant, hopeful, creative soul and tried to sculpt her into a silent, beautiful, and manageable statue for his personal pedestal. He thought he had succeeded, but he didn't realize that while I was standing perfectly still for a decade, I was not idle. I was studying my prison. I was learning the exact location of every crack in the foundation, every weak point in the walls, every rusty bar on the windows. And all the while, I was sharpening a chisel. He didn't destroy me. He inadvertently gave me the greatest, most terrible gift of my life, a singular, all-consuming purpose. In the crucible of his betrayal, I was not broken. I was forged. People always ask the wrong question. They want to know if revenge is worth it. They want to know if, after the fire dies down, it leaves you empty, a hollowed-out shell of your former self. It's a simplistic, moralizing question for a complex, primal transformation. I am not empty. I have never been more full of my own art, my own thoughts, my own future, my own life. The real question isn't whether revenge is sweet. It's what you do with the freedom you seize in its name. It's about the cathedral you choose to build for yourself after you finally torn down your own prison. What would you build?